I welcome all of you to this book discussion, Islam, Discussing the Message of Service and the Gulen Movement. The Center for Study of Society and Secularism was founded in 1993 after the Mumbai riots by a renowned Islamic scholar, Dr. Engineer, who was also a Bohra reformist, also a tall figure in the secular movement of India. And of course, he has done some seminal work on contributing to Islam and fighting against fundamentalism, gender rights in Islam, in the Quran, fighting the Sayyidina, we all know about that. So fighting fundamentalism of all shades, that's one of the reasons why we have organized this book discussion, to talk about the positive message of Islam and what are its contributions world over. CSSS from the last 2 decades has been working on promoting communal harmony and peace. Part of this also means that we have been addressing communal stereotypes that people may have about the society at large, the myths against certain communities, certain religious identities. For this, we are called to many colleges and organizations to talk about this. Also, we do monitor communal violence, communal riots that take place all over the country. There are some analytical studies we do about the same. So one is that every year we come out with a report on the communal riots in India. Apart from this, we also do fact findings into major communal riots in India. So there are a lot of fact finding reports that CSSS has produced and published, which are also on the website if anyone is interested. Part of our publications also include a journal that's called the Indian Journal of Secularism, where prominent scholars have contributed so far. There's also Secular Perspective. This is kind of short articles that come every 15 days. Apart from our publications, we also have peace centers. CSSS supports peace centers, which are also peace networks across country. Right now we have 6 peace centers, which are working in communal conflict areas and in very trying situations. They promote diversity, highlight diversity, and promote democratic culture. So this includes a lot of cultural interventions, again trying to establish peace during riots, trying to prevent riots. Other thing that we do in Delhi and Mumbai, and I think quite a few of us have met there, that's the memorial lectures in the memory of Dr. Engineer. So far, very eminent scholars have come and delivered these lectures, which is entirely honor for us. Some of them included Robla Thapar, Sukhdev Thorat, Christoph Jeffrelot in Mumbai. And also very recently we had on the 22nd a cultural program. CSSS organizes cultural programs every year, trying to promote composite culture and the liberal message of the Bhakti saints, Sufi saints, so the same democratic voices that our tradition is proud to have. Professor Anwar Alam, I hope I'm doing justice to a lot of work that he has done, is the senior fellow with Policy Perspective Foundation, New Delhi. Earlier, he was also the professor of international relations at Zirve University, Gaziantep, Turkey, and Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He was also the director of Center for West Asian Studies, Jamia again, and associate professor at School of International Studies, JNU. He is recipient of the prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Postdoctoral Research Fellowship in 2003-05, and again he was bestowed with the same fellowship in 2016-17. So he has quite a stint in Germany. He also specializes in West Asian and South Asian studies. He was a visiting fellow at the University of Bristol at Department of Sociology. Also, to his credit, he has many books. One of the seminal books that came out was in 2016, which is Muslim minorities in India and Europe. With that, of course, and he was also the visiting faculty at Fatmi University at Istanbul.
Islam is known in the world more today for its Jihadi movement. And somehow that is not the whole reality. That is not the entire reality of Islam. In fact, it is a very marginal reality. We do have some extremists, but then in which religion we do not have extremists? However, the whole extremist section of Islam is blown out of proportion, and the world knows Islam as only Jihadi religion. Although it is one of the fastest growing religion in US, even after 9/11, and this is a fact told to me by none other than Consulate General of US in Mumbai, that even after 9/11, and immediately after 9/11, Islam was one of the fastest growing religion. So one keeps wondering, if this religion is jihadi religion and teaches you nothing except killing the kafirs, then why is it followed by 1.6 billion people in the world? It is the second largest religion. And if it is jihadi religion and followed by 1.6 billion people in the world, then why are they not killing the other 1.6 billion people in the world? The answer lies in today's discussion. The answer lies in the book that Professor Anwar Alam has written. And so when Indialogue Foundation approached us with a request, can we organize today's event, a discussion on the book, we simply jumped on the opportunity that we must organize this, and we must talk about various dimensions, various currents, various movements in Islam. Before we proceed, I invite Indialogue General Secretary Behzad Fatmi to tell us a little bit about Indialogue Foundation and what it is doing. That also has been inspired by the Gulenist movement, something that we are going to talk and something about which the book is about Gulenist movement. So Indialogue Foundation in India has also been inspired and working on the lines.
It's a very, very important book, also unique in the sense that it is the first book by an Indian academic on the Hizmet movement or the Gulen movement. The book, as a result of 10 years of hard work, academic research, is an essential read for anyone interested in the Hizmet movement. Apart from introducing the movement to people outside its circle in the most authentic and comprehensive way, the book also explains the origin, development, and discourse of the movement to its own volunteers from a South Asian perspective. As a matter of fact, as I said, it is the first book by an Indian academic on the movement. It is also interesting to note that the book was conceived during the heydays of the movement and concluded at a time when the movement itself is going through an existential crisis because of the persecutions that are going on in Turkey and the problems it has created for the movement around the world. Naturally, therefore, the author got the opportunity to critically examine the discourse, activities, and resilience of the movement as they stand the test of time.
I was very much impressed by the movement. If I take 1 minute and tell you one anecdote, I and Swami Sarvalokanand of Ramakrishna Mission, we visited Turkey together. And I think Swami Sarvalokanand also was so inspired and felt so included by people of Hizmet movement that we started with Swami telling me, Irfan, I'm afraid of mosques because I think mosques are places where weapons are stored. And it ended with Swami Sarvalokanand asking me, nudging, when we were in a mosque, to see the historical and the beautiful aspect of the mosque. He nudged me, will I be allowed to pray here? I said, why not? You can pray here. But I don't know to pray. I said, you just do what others do. And he did. He stood shoulder to shoulder, and he was afraid. Will anybody say you are a Hindu and get out of the mosque? I said, first, nobody does that, ever. And second, in Turkey, nobody knows that saffron
Not even
clothes.
in India.
Not even in India. And in Turkey, nobody even knows that saffron clothes are worn by Hindus. So he did stand shoulder to shoulder with others. He did pray. And then, to my surprise, he asked, please photograph me praying. I want to keep this as a memory. And he wanted the whole world to know that he prayed in the mosque. He prayed namaz in the mosque.
Wow.
So that was because the movement itself was very inclusive, he felt included.
I must recall here that my last meeting with Asghar Sahab, Gulen Engineer Sahab, and as a student, we have all grown up reading some of his literature at Jawaharlal Nehru University, at many places where we had a multiple occasions to interact with him, in fact. But the last time I interacted with him, that was somewhere 2011, when I met him in Antalya, in Turkey, actually. And there was this international conference on Kashmir, actually. No, on family, actually. And where I was also participating, and more than 150 delegates all over from the world. And that conference was also organized, later I get to know, by the Gulen Movement, actually. That time I didn't know who is organizing. But much later I get to know that was also organized by a Gulen Movement, in fact. And as I read Asghar Sahab literature right from his very first book on Islamic State, and as and when he moved to a kind of the liberation theology, and kind of, for example, in conviction of bringing reform from within the structure of religion, within the structure of a tradition, in fact, then I actually asked him very pointedly in Antalya, actually, that Asghar Sahab, tell me one thing, because we have really grown up, because I do also come from the left background, and to this extent I do share my past with Irfan Sahab, actually. Irfan Sahab was active in Maharashtra, and I was active in Bhojpur, actually, for pretty almost a decade, in fact, working with one of the CPI branch. So I do share that, in fact. But I asked Asghar Sahab very frankly, actually, कि Asghar Sahab, आप मुझे ये बताइए कि आप जो कुरान का इंटरप्रिटेशन करते हैं और आप जो हदीस को फ्रिक्वेंटली कोट करते हैं, ये इसमें आपका कन्विक्शन है, यू आर यूजिंग एज एन इंस्ट्रूमेंट फॉर ब्रिंगिंग अ रिफॉर्म. Is it a matter of your faith and a conviction? और उसको आप इंस्ट्रूमेंट की तरह आपको लगता है कि and therefore this text has to be relied, because in Islam that is the most the authority, the textual authority that you have. He said कि Anwar, no, I have a conviction, I am a believer, and each and every words that I interpret only with that convictions, actually. So it's not for me the questions anymore that how the reform will come. Every generation will address to this question its own way. But as and when I engage more with Hadith and more with Quran, I do see a very different kind of the insight in the life. That was the last. And I had asked this question out of my curiosity, to be honest with you. Okay, where you are now. You were 70 plus, and also out of this curiosity, actually, because we moved the long trajectory from a Marcion understanding of the Arabia in terms of the Islamic states and moving towards the liberation theology, in fact. And then he actually asked me that. And then slightly we discussed about the religion and all. And to be very honest, in fact, that he actually told me at the end of the discussion that I do see some of the good things happening within you. You may also move in a different trajectory, actually. I can see that. And with this, I would like to say that as much as, to be very honest with you, that as much as I do research on this Gulen movement, the Gulen movement has also internally affected me, to be honest with you. So there is a contribution of this movement in my own transformations on certain issues, in fact. Well, I would not still take a position that I am a kind of believer in this and that, but certainly it has made me a more humane and a more deeper understanding of the religions and this and that, in fact. This book is basically, as I said in the very first sentence, is a book of an accident. I have a specialization in political Islam and the Islamic movement, but till 2008, I never heard this movement. And in the global production of the Islamic movement, in the global production of the political Islam, Gulen Movement is nowhere. I never heard Badiuzzama Sayyid Nursi, I never heard Fatehullah Gulen, in all the which are coming from the Western productions, in fact, just nowhere, in fact. One fine morning, it so happened, I get a call from one Turkish gentleman, and then he said, let's go to Turkey. I said, why? Why should I go to Turkey? I was the director of Center of Business Studies in Jammu. बोला नहीं, let's go, ऐसे ही चलते हैं. हमने कहा यार खूबसूरत जगह है, अच्छी बात है, ले चलें आप मुझे, but purpose क्या है? So he never tell you the purpose actually. That was my first experience. So anyway, I went there. So for the first time in 2010, I get to get some feeling about this movement, visited their universities, the schools, media houses, presses, and this and that. And for me, it was a mind-boggling in a sense, because I really could not see any religion in that structures as such, you know. Then in 2010 actually came this visiting professorship. I mean, the idea of basically doing a research. And since I'm primarily interested in the religious questions, I got as a good opportunity for two reasons. One was not that I started believing in a Gulen movement, was very fascinating actually. But one was that I happened to be the expert in the Middle East without ever any field studies. One of the problem of the area studies in India is that you become the professor and the expert in the field without ever visiting field. So this was a serious lacuna in my CV. And I just really wanted to fill the gap in my CV actually. And I thought it's a wonderful opportunity to visit to Turkey, and probably from Turkey I can go to Jordan and Syria, which I did actually. I can move across the Middle East to the many places, and also so that's how I perceive actually, you know. So I started, and then, but slowly and gradually I really got interested in the movement from the research point of view. To be very honest with you, the first 6 to 7 months, whichever the schools, colleges, dormitories, the universities which I visited, the press and the media and this and that, I really could not find that in what way this movement is an Islamic movement. And this movement was also projecting itself as a social movement, but they were not even calling it an Islamic social movement. So that was my first puzzle actually, you know, because I do not see any Islamic signs, any Islamic calendars, any except saying that they are quite good in the prayers, or for example. Otherwise, much later, I would say that I could develop some understanding. But then by 11th and by 2011, 2012, and again I visited 2013 for almost 3.5 years in Turkey. So altogether I live in Turkey for almost 5 years. And this book actually is a product of my engagement from 2009 till I would say 2018. And it's a very, I would say, ethnographic kind of very intense field work. I get to probably interviewed more than 70 people, and I did interview first the generations or the colleagues or the companion of Fatehullah Gulen who was in Turkey, who started with the movement. Then next I moved to the youths. Then I next moved to, for example, the Kurdish area, in fact. So I did many structured interviews and many countless unstructured, everyday, informal understanding of the movements, in fact, you know. And then I get to know, and there are few conclusions that basically arrive through my research. Number one, I arrive that no matter what the movement basically project itself into the Western public sphere and globally, that in terms of democratic forces, in terms of civic social, it's a die-hard Sunni Islamic movement. The projection may be different actually. It's a die-hard, and I have used the term orthodox. It's a Sunni Orthodox Islamic movement, in fact, because their own inspirations, motivations, everything is coming from the examples of Prophet Muhammad, companion, vision, this, that, each and everything, in fact. And that took me some time, because you don't see their Islamic visibility, but internally they are very much. So that's number one, in fact. The second is that probably, which I realize is that yes, in a Turkish context, the movement actually emerged not by conception of any democracy, but because of implication of its activities, it has increased the zone of democratic sphere. Because it is involved in education, it is involved in dialogue, it is involved in social, it is in girls' education and the others. So it doesn't have any political conception of a democracy fighting with the regime, or for example, but its implication, and that implication has really remarkable implications for that kind of thing. Third is that probably coming from the left background and this and that, in fact, I tend to actually believe that religion cannot produce a social good. I mean, for the first time, only in the context of because I could see, for example, some of the educational experiences by Jamaat-e-Islami or South Asian understanding of Islam, or for example, Tabligh, or for example, any other Islamic organization who are very much involved in setting up their schools and this and that and the others, but not a very quality productions actually. Gulen Movement appears to me probably one of the remarkable Islamic movement in the sense is this, that even though it's a remarkably religious one, but it has produced remarkable social good. And the social good in the name of God, in the name of the Allah, without any kind of the expectations, in fact. So what actually attracts me Gulen Movement slowly and gradually is that it is not that it's only the Fatehullah Gulen who was talking about the education. Many other Islamic scholars have talked about Islamic education. It's nothing serious. But the way he basically conceptualized educations. And he initiated with the idea of the schools, because majority of the Islamic movements, if you see in the 19th century and the early 20th century, is that they have tried to deal with the question of the Islam and modernity and Islam and science in terms of the institutionalization of the university. So we will have the university where we have a rationalization of Islam, or for example scientific interpretation of Quran, and that university will basically produce some kind of synthesis between Islam and a science, Islam and the modernity. Large number of like reform of the Al-Azhar, or for example Sir Sayyid, even idea of Aligarh Muslim University and other things. It doesn't have a conception of, it has a conception of an university, traditional understanding, but it doesn't have a conception of an education. So all this university, like for example, you have Aligarh, or for example Al-Azhar, or for example others, they could produce very technical, skillful doctors, engineers, but not necessarily they have really seriously engaged with an idea of education. And Fatehullah Gulen Discourse, probably for the first time, what it struck me is that education actually emerged as a kind of an independent value that needs to be sought and that needs to be understood, and that is the most important value for any kind of the upward mobility, in fact. The second is that, which is very, very important, is that yes, Fatehullah Gulen linked the idea of education with the whole question of faith that has been done, but here is that education, I mean, in a sense is that he basically, like in the South Asian discourse, in a South Asian Islamic discourse, you do find at the local level kinds of a discourse that there's a remarkable differentiations between ilm and fun. And ilm means only an Islamic educations. And fun means कि आप डॉक्टर्स हैं, इंजीनियर्स हैं, फिजिक्स हैं, वो फन है, वो आपका एजुकेशंस नहीं है. So there is a very powerful internal calculated family socialization, madrasa socialization, that the Islamic education, the education essentially means this. And probably for the first time in the Fatehullah Gulen, this binary kept collapse. I think is that for 300 and 400 years, the whole Muslim world has been grappled with this question of this binary between Islamic education and the secular educations. The majority of the Muslims did not acquire the English language, because if you acquire the English language, then there are greater chances you will deviate from Islam. And after the post-independence, I really see in India actually, probably we are lucky enough, my family was lucky enough, that majority of the parents did not send their children to the government schools with an idea that Islam is likely to compromise. And they also did not establish the chains of the educational institutions simultaneously, parallel. So therefore what happened is that the community actually become a kind of the educational backwardness is a phase that happened in Turkey also. With the Kemalist revolutions actually, majority of Anatolia, Muslim, religious people shunned the government schools. and the son the government universities and the colleges. They started coming into education only when Fatehullah Gulen and Badiuzzama Sayyid Nursi, in fact. So that was indeed very remarkable. And then Fatehullah Gulen could be in a position to really make a binary that education is a value. I mean, there's no question of Islam and being secular. Whichever the form you come, you have to move. And therefore, you do find that in this community, you could be a remarkable musician. You could be a remarkable artist. You could be remarkable painters. You could be remarkable singers. And I have seen some of the programs they organize, even on the Quran and the Hadith, and also with a kind of the musical drums. I have seen that. I have seen that, that these are not something, but it actually goes with an idea of education. How do you really internalize, in fact? And that's how slowly and gradually it became a very powerful social movement in Turkey. Like, for example, I can give you an example like Istanbul. If Istanbul has 50 districts, I mean, each of these districts are basically offering a large number of the fellowships to the students who come from Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Pakistan, each and every house. Even the lower middle class houses, because it became the marker of identity, or for example, dignity, or for example, the justice, or the question of equity, they themselves were offering 1 fellowship and 2 fellowship or 3 fellowship. Large number of industries were certainly offering more than 1,000 fellowship of building construction and the wealth. It became a kind of identity for what we call the black Turks in Turkey. I mean, there are all Turks, but there are divisions between the white Turks and the black Turks. Now, the white Turks happen to be the privileged, who actually control the state, who happen to be the Kemalists, who happen to be secular, who happen to be the leftist, or who happen to the large number of the Alvi, who happen to be the minorities. But they seek the Kemalist education first, and therefore they were predominant into the state administrations. It's not because of any conspiracy, because they sought and therefore they were eligible. The large number of Muslims majority were not. And therefore what you find is that in the post-Kemalist phase, the understanding of secular become far more exclusive than it was the time of the Kemalists, because a large number of the Alvi minority were holding that positions, in fact. So in a movement, in a sense, this movement actually promoted the educations, people who started going into the state, competition actually increased, and these black sects happened to be the mostly religious people, Anatolian, peasantry, working class, without any share into the modern public spheres and this and that. It started contesting only by the 80s, the 90s. So both like Fatehullah Gulen and as well as, for example, Erdogan, both are representing black Turks. So it's a conflict basically at the moment basically within them, in fact. The third is probably, which actually strikes me, is that there is a space for a social movement within the Islamic field. I mean, so far what was happening to me and the large Western discourses on the secular movement, the social movement can only be imagined in a secular way. The social movement can always be imagined in that there is no way you can imagine a social movement in the religious way. So if you say, for example, a social movement, education is certainly one of the criteria, but the motivations would be different. There was no idea of Islamic social movements, in fact. But as like, for example, you cover, for example, the larger discourse in the Middle East or the West Asia or Turkey and this and that, where the Islam function in a very different way, unlike in the South Asia. In the South Asia, Islam is more a question of identity than a question of a discourse. In the Middle East, Islam is basically the meta narratives. It's a meta discourse, whether you accept the Turkish situation. But by it is also the public sphere was Islamized. So whether you are a liberal or you're a communist, you are left-right, you have to justify, legitimize, build narratives in the name of the Islam. Unlike, for example, here, But slowly and gradually, with that, the question of identity also came. What also strikes me with regard to this Gulen movement research is that I find that this is the only movement that is not placing any emphasis at all on the question of identity. So this is the movement that I did not find any kind of the conception of other. Like there was no conception of like Kemalist as other, or secular as other, or something as other. So it is a remarkable inclusive movement in which it took a position of a Muslim that, in a sense, is that anybody is a Muslim who believes in all the prophets. That essentially means for Gulen is that that there is no community without the Prophet. So he virtually actually believes. And within that he also believes movement, not only believes, but it also practices. When he actually took a position that the diversity is divinely intended. So what happened is that 500 years of the development of the Islamic, you can say, ideology or value or Islamization is towards the homogenization of a Muslim identity. And that homogenization of a Muslim identity is that there is a one way to become a Muslim. That in the Fatehullah Gulen, in the Hikmat movement, there is no prescription how do you become Muslims. It doesn't prescribe you the ways actually. So what you find very interesting is that the movement actually started celebrating diversity, and diversity in the real sense of the term. So I would find that the average Turks, for example, in their society, every time they would, like, for example, they would celebrate Nupudin. So they have the celebrations. But that was normally also shared by the non-Gulenist, you know. But then in the Gulen movement, I could see that they would keep fast on the Moses days. That they would keep fast on the Jesus, remembering Jesus, or the Abrahams, particularly that they are the very important, you know, and unless and until I do that. And this came actually from this idea that not only that you will be only Muslim when you believe all the prophets, but this whole idea that diversity is divinely intended, quoting the Quranic position. And if the diversity is divinely intended, you do not have any alternative, but you actually enter into a dialogue with everybody actually. And that's how the idea of dialogue basically in the movement come. So basically they started believing that dialogue is a kind of the framework for the resolutions of the conflicts, as a kind of the framework, for example, removing each other misunderstanding, in fact, promoting the common goods, in fact, but you have to fail. So it was not a dialogue like between the two religious clergy actually, or what is called the interfaith dialogue. I mean, the Gulen movement basically conceptualized dialogues in terms of the everyday dialogues. And a dialogue is a kind of the instruments which you have to do in order to address others. So everybody has self and everybody has others. So you have to also integrate the notion of other within yourself while you are interacting with the others actually. So that was really remarkable that the movement not only developed in terms of theory, but it could also practice. So I could see that. So like, for example, in my encounter in large number with the leftists or communists and the others, you know, they have a very simple mechanical understanding that Professor Alam, I can tell you, the movement is bad, religion is bad, Islam is bad. It is likely to erase the Kemalist identity and a secular identity. After then, our conversation will come to an end. But my conversation with these people in Turkey, it went on and on, and they are willing to talk to you, they are willing to participate to you, they are willing to come out with all kinds of alternative arguments, in fact. That's precisely because that the movement has not been developed on any conception of other, in fact. So that was really, really very important, in fact. Within Turkey and then within probably 150 years, I mean, it became a global. But then, you know all the stories, in fact, but I have decided personally that at a time when the movement has been branded as a terrorist, I mean, Erdogan regime has branded the movement as a terrorist, but I have named the book For the Sake of Allah. And I have, because I could see that, for example, that Erdogan, any regime has not cited a single trace of violence within the movement over the last 60 years of the. So then there is a politics of terrorism, in fact. And in the context of the military coup and this and that, you took over all their establishments, you know, the universities, college, industries and everything, dismissing the large number of people within 1 week, which actually amounts to $55 billion asset belonging to the movements, you know. But the movement till then also did not generate its own people to come out on the streets or protest because of its die-hard faith for the sake of Allah without any kind of the expectations. That the movement actually believes. In fact, for me, the sake of Allah, the title of the book basically reflects two kinds of strands. One kind of strength is that for me that for the sake of Allah actually represent a very collective aspiration of these people actually. So I would not say that they are not rational, they are not very calculative, they mediate with this world actually, but their larger collective aspiration is connected with their place in the other world. That's for sure actually. That's for sure. You know, guided by the other world. Very powerful notion of the. And therefore, I did not find that there's a large number of work that has been done on the movement, that Gulen movement is basically secularizing Islam because of its engagements with the world. I did not find. It is neither secularizing Islam nor any kind of the political Islam, but it basically understands the secular and the religious component internally to each other in terms of function as a holistic understanding of Islam. So there is no demarcation as such in this movement, in fact. But nonetheless, the movement has taken position, and in my interview comes again, that it die-hard believe that the state has to be essentially secular. And it will go to one step further, that the ideal condition and the ideal position of the Hijmat movement would be, as per the statement of Fatehullah Gulen, is that it's not a question the state has to be secular, but the state has to be neutral. I mean, this idea that secular means neutral is extremely problematic idea. Because if the people who are running the state and who are secularly ideological, then they would like to transform the society. And they would like to transform the lives of the people according to their lives and desires and the secular choices, in fact. Therefore, for Fatehullah Gulen, any kind of ism becomes problematic for him. So Islam is fine, Islamism is not. Secular is fine, secularism is not. Liberal is fine, liberalism is not. Because any kind of ism actually creates the whole question of us and them. And therefore it will also have the ideological understanding of the things. And as long as that will remain, you ceases to be a democratic person, in fact. So you cannot be a democratic person, because as long as that ideological component or ideological understanding of the social changes, because state comes its own a question of the transformations. So it says, in fact, that's how basically the movement is not the book is not the glorification of a Gulen movement. The book highlights wherever is the problematic part with the Gulen movement, actually. Very seriously it highlights, in fact. So it doesn't glorify, in fact. Yes, it attempts to understand the movement, that is my last point, that it is not a modernist phenomenon. It's a postmodern phenomenon. It deals with a question of equity. It deals with a question of recognition. It deals with a question of the people-centered, human resources. Like, it doesn't deal with a question of the state. So the entire narrative is micro, the entire narrative is specific. It's a people focus. It's not meta-narrative, nation and state, which Fatehullah Gulen at one point he was used to be. But after 60 he left everything, actually. So then the movement actually fits in a post-modern narratives, than actually placing in context of religion-state relationship, politics and religion-state relationship, or a relationship between the civil society and the states largely. Thank you.